All right, everyone. My job is the town historian of the town of Islip. It is a state constitutional job. We're probably the only state that has this, but every government in the state of New York uh, has to have someone in there whose job it is to look after historic resources, to interpret the documents which are under the town clerk. The town clerk and the historian work very closely together. So Olga Murray and I have been amazed at some of the things we found in the back rooms and so forth. So I'm going to start sharing those with you. All right. So researching your home history. Your home has a genealogy also. And if anybody's driven around Idle Hour, you recognize this house. This is basically actually it's one of Burnham and Williams' first major greenhouses, and it was built for the Idle Hour estate. This has been quite a show with the town because this is one of the buildings that we have a great deal of records on because it's on the state inventory, and I'll go into that in a minute what that is. But it had all sorts of at one point this was the most popularly requested pieces of information was the assessment of this building, because lots of people wanted to buy it, and somebody finally did and is doing some restoration, but most people took one look at it and ran. But again, every house has a history and a genealogy, so to speak. Now, here, I'm going to welcome you all to the high adventure of research in New York State. Step one, New York State is not as centralized as other states. To put it mildly, that is an understatement. Records are all over the place. Some of the records that we just were discussing, some town records that are somehow in the Sayville library because people take them home and later when they clear out, they want to do something with them. We have found some of our town records in Florida. The state archives has got a great deal of information, but it isn't as organized because they are still trying to figure out what they have. And we are in the same boat in the town of Islip. So the decentralization is both a positive and a negative when you're researching your home. Records are in a number of offices and a number of places. Again, you'll be told that records are lost, but they're somewhere. Sometimes they've gotten into a private organization, sometimes with a historical society, which means you have to really be dogged and determined to find every last bit of information. The record holdings for instance, the town of Islip and Long Island in general are in federal, state, county, town, city, districts, and villages. All of them have record holdings. And under the New York State Constitution and various laws, each has a different requirement to hold records. Some records that you might think were permanent retention by state law are not. Other things that you find absolutely ridiculous are permanent retention. In addition, a agency can say, I want to keep that. So you may accidentally find a court case or some fines against the house, which might give you some information somewhere in the record system. New York State Constitution. If anybody has ever read this, they are probably now at a mental institution. It was originally designed by a Medal of Honor winner who was bragged that he wrote a constitution that was designed not to work. And it has done that proudly ever since the initial version of it. It's been updated a number of times, but the initial setup has remained the same. One of the big things in New York is home rule, which means every time a local area wants to do something, they have to get a bill from the legislature. Now, one of the things people don't realize is that, for instance, New York City technically is subservient to the state, even though under the Constitution, their cities are basically on their own with representation to the state. New York City, the state can come in and take control, which has added all sorts of fun and frolic with the records in that place. Here, one of the examples of home rule is when you form a village. As village is a government below a city. Uh, Again, now, though records that would normally be held by maybe the town and county wind up in the village. So at different times, there are different uh, places the record may be kept. So your home, if and again, it doesn't affect Sayville as much as other areas, your home may wind up have been in more than um, one area, and therefore more than one record has been kept, and depending on the year. I want to give you an example, some examples of what this means, and you'll run into this kind of stuff. All of you should be familiar with Main Street, Sayville, alias Montauk Highway. And this is an example of the various jurisdictions that frequently create problems. It began in 1735 as the South Country Road. It was authorized in 1732. Nobody in Islip wanted the road, and we can spend hours on the reason for that, but Islip really wanted to be left alone, considering some of the stuff that was going on here. But in 1735, they were required to go ahead and build this road. Nobody said they had to pave it, which they didn't. In fact, it wasn't even paved in Sayville until 1915. And one of the areas that was well paved was in front of a mansion in Oakdale, where the owner of the mansion had it with dust streaming in while he was having dinner parties. I just want to give you an example of one of the overlapping problems. Minister of the Sayville Methodist Church wanted to put a handicap space by the ramp. So he simply sent a letter into the town. Well, Montauk Highway, or Main Street, the roadbed belongs to the state of New York. The road surface belongs to the county of Suffolk. The requirement for signage and to pay for all of the traffic lights belongs to the town of Islip. And to boot, it's a federal highway for emergency evacuation. He was told by the person in the town that just either paint the thing and put your own sign up, or put it somewhere else, because you'll never get it through all four places. Again, multiple jurisdiction layers means there's multiple places of records for every building, everything in the town. Another example, somebody may have a house on Fire Island. Who holds the title to Fire Island? Well, we don't know. We do know that by the 1870s, things were completely confused, and they decided that a judge could go ahead and decide who owned what property. Well, to give you an example of some of the things he ran into, Fire Island Lighthouse, that property belonged to the Treasury Department, which at that point ran the lighthouse service. The life-saving service had built life-saving stations all over the place. Every time the beach changed, they moved the station. Well, that meant there were little parcels of property everywhere, again, held by Treasury. The state bought the hotel that was there, which was theoretically private owned, but there wasn't sure there was ever the Surf Hotel, whether they actually owned the property, they just built a hotel. Then the state and federal government decided to swap lands, and in addition, who owns the 6 miles of extension of Fire Island? Nobody knows. This caused some problems quite recently when they tried to put a power line down. What the judge finally did and said, if you're on a piece of property and you have a building, congratulations, it's yours. Because he gave up. There was no real reason. Where are the records? You got to go to court records to find this stuff out. It's in various state court records, which are published and online, but it takes a lot of digging to figure out where all of these records are. Let me give you a little background on the town of Islip. We never were supposed to exist. All the towns were supposed to go shore to shore. In spite of what everybody tells you, we are not one of the 10 original towns. We weren't even purchased at the time of the founding of the 1683 marking out of counties and towns. But the lower portion of Smithtown, pieces of Huntington and Brookhaven were indicated as Indian territory. Nobody had a patent. Nobody had any kind of control over the land except the local tribe. Along comes William Nickel. As you see, the brown piece is his first patent. He winds up initially with this smaller area, and by the end of the 1600s into the early 1700s, he winds up owning 55,000 of the 77,000 acres that make up the town of Islip. What they did was something quite extraordinary. Nickel, and I could, again, this is another thing that we could spend hours on. Nickel had a lot of political influence. He went ahead and got a law passed. It was really easy. He was Speaker of the Assembly. And the law made Islip a precinct. Now, all your property rights, all your property ownership are based on the patents that you see here. They are the very first lands. What is a patent? The patent means that someone has said that this land, there is no other owner, that this is the sole owner. So that's the basis of land ownership in the town of Islip. Town of Islip went along as a precinct until the late 1700s. After the Revolution, the state of New York passed a bill and made them a town. Well, this didn't make too many people happy because Huntington claimed that they had one side of it, which that case went on until the 1870s. And it's another thing that you can use, court cases which mention people who live on certain properties. Also, Brookhaven actually had what is now Sayville, was technically in Brookhaven. However, William Nickel managed to get a vote on the Brookhaven Council, and they decided that William Nickel should have his land with the rest of his land, so it became part of Islip. That is why the waters south of Sayville, from basically Nickel Point, which is in East Islip or Great River, Nickel Point down south to the beach, all belongs to the town of Brookhaven and not to the town of Islip. So you will find some of those. You'll also find that to pay the taxes owed after the Revolution, Nickel sold a large portion of land, Sayville, to the Edwards family. And the Edwardses, you would find them back in your deeds as you go back through. It gives you an idea what a patent. This patent used to be in the Rotunda Town Hall. Right now it's down in Philadelphia being conserved and photographed and digitized so we can find out what it actually says. But this is the Mulberry Patent, which is a royal patent. There's a royal seal on it. And again, that gives him absolute rights. Now, an interesting piece of this is that those absolute rights are so absolute. They also covered waters out to the 3-mile limit, basically. And that is why, if anybody's a fisherman, they know that New York State has this rather strange voluntary saltwater fishing license. Our present governor and Barack Obama people were going to go ahead and require paid, which other states have. You have to buy a saltwater fishing license to help finance some of the things that are done by the federal and state government. New York can't do it because the state does not own the water or anything in it. You own it. The patents were turned over to the people of the towns that the patents covered. Enough of the background. Let's talk about home basics. How do you start? If you were doing your own genealogy, you would put down what you know, and the same is necessary in researching a home or building. Everything you know about the building, everything the real estate agent told you about the building. And by the way, there is no town such as Sayville West. It's West Sayville, and it's a different hamlet. And we'll talk about hamlets and towns in a minute. Put all of that down. Put down go look at what documents you've got. You've got a survey. The survey may have different things on it or formerly owned by, and it'll give you names of the neighbors for chance, which will allow you to do a number of things as we talk about them a little later. One of the big problems in the town of Islip is street addresses. There were no street addresses in most of the hamlets of Islip until the 1950s. By the 60s, they had street addresses. Prior to that, they didn't necessarily have street addresses, and the fire departments were told that if you wanted mail delivery, which, for instance, the West Sayville Fire Department got a hold of the federal government and said, we want house delivery rather than picking it up at the post office. They said, well, if you have street numbers, we will allow you to have home delivery. Well, what they did was they went door to door and asked you to give your house a number. And in many of the places, it was as long as the number is larger than your neighbor's number. I'll give you an example. I live on Brook Street in West Sayville. My neighbor to the east has 89 on their house. My house is 93. The house next to me is 101 because it began a development that was built in the 50s and into the 70s. And so the numbers make no sense at all. So you'll see this, and there's a lot of places in Sayville that are the same, where all of a sudden it seems that you're missing 25 lots, and then the house is the number. Somebody liked the number they chose, so they chose that number. There's also a bad habit of the post office that we've run into. It is not here as much, but it has happened up in the northern part of the town of Islip, where the post office decided to renumber houses. My wife was a census worker. She went to try to find places the federal government swore were there, and she couldn't find them. That's because the post office decided to renumber everything in Brentwood as it developed. And, even the town had problems because we were looking for a historic structure at 22. It turned out it was 222 now. And it took us running around with photographs, sneaking behind bushes and taking a look at buildings to figure out where this historic structure that somebody wanted to do some alterations on so we could approve or disapprove it. What is definitive? Lot, block, and section numbers. That you need, it's vital, it should be in your deed. With that, there's a lot of things that open up to you. For instance, half of our records are street addresses. Half of them have road names. Again, roads change. I just found out that for some reason, somebody decided there's a West Main Street in West Sayville. That's pretty good because it would be 100 feet long. But the lot, block, and section are fairly certain. That's what taxes are based on. That's what your survey is based on. So you need that because building permits, because of the confusion with addresses, building permits and many other permits are based on lot, block, and section. Your deed contains a description of meets and bounds, which says what your lot looks like, as well as any other information that might be on it. You may find that there's a parcel of property that was part of yours that's noted on the survey and on the deed, but now has been turned over due to a redevelopment or a change in boundaries. Again, my house has that feature. We actually own half the neighbor's yard, and for $1, we finally straightened it out, and because you have to have $1 or more in the state of New York to make something legal. Title searches. Talk a little more about that later. It may or may not yield what you want, and here's the reason. In Nassau County, New York City, places like that, the title searches are very detailed. They'll go all the way back. Suffolk County, because of all the land grants and everything else, and something we'll go into a little later, where properties were swapped at family dinners, they went in for many years used something called the Torrens system, which means that if your lot had a clear title on the previous owner, all you would be told is that you have a clear title on the property, and they didn't do much more than that. In other words, you went from clear title to clear title. Some of them are quite detailed. Some of them are not detailed. And another part of this is if you notice that you buy the insurance on your deed, on your property, you will find that in Suffolk County, because of all of the different things that went on, you will find that the no, you'll find that it's a separate company than the one that may do Nassau, Suffolk, and the rest of New York State because of the issues with some of the titles here because of the colonial problems. Charming house here. This was once a beautiful home. Unfortunately, it's a nightmare. There's all sorts of things involved with it. But the building itself may hold clues. For instance, look in your closets, look behind baseboards, look in the attics, and if you open a wall up, look in the walls. One of the great things is for years, builders in this area, especially all through Long Island, would be drinking beer on the job or drinking soda and drop the soda bottles down and make great insulation, yes. But sometimes when you pull those bottles, you can tell when either the last work was done on the property or when it was actually built. Beer bottles, writing in closets. A lot of times people write in the closet when it was last painted. People are notorious for not painting closets, so this may be a great clue. I'll give you an example from my own house. The town insisted that my house was built in 1954. A town board member, who's long since deceased, had a picture of this house taken in 1940. You can clearly see the 1940 plate on the car in front of it, with two men standing there, one of which is the Johnson of Johnson Avenue, who died at Pearl Harbor. So we know the house was there. We still couldn't prove it until I looked at the boiler and a few other things. There were tags on it that showed when it was delivered. And I started to get this idea, wait a minute, this house has been here since 1928. Sure enough, when we pulled the cabinets out to change them out in the kitchen, turns out the cabinet, they had written the date that the cabinets were delivered in 1928. So that was an indication that confirmed what the suspicions were. Check with your neighbors. They may have photos. They may mention and remember the names. Oh, the family so-and-so lived here. In my case, the family had this, was at the closing. They'd had it since the house finally came on the market from the brothers that built the two of the houses that are next door to each other. So we got to meet them and understand some of their story. One of the other hints is construction and style. Here on Long Island, that does not work very well because we are not exactly stylish in architecture. Sometimes the architecture itself is 20, 30 years behind the time. And you can see an example of that if you go over to Islip Grange, and the house there, which was built in the 1850s, uses a style that was popular in the 1830s. Again, with other pieces added on. So that may or may not be a good indication. You also will find that under that vinyl siding, there may be clapboards, there may be shingles, there may be all sorts of things. And again, if it pries loose, take a look, find out. It'll give you a hint of when the house was built. Land surveys. There are all sorts of problems with early surveys. And even those done in the 20th century, they are not always accurate unless done today, and even then. Now, today, we have all sorts of sophisticated satellite systems and everything else. But back then, they used benchmarks, which, for instance, the benchmark on Brook Street was hit by the snowplow one winter, and it's at least 30 feet off at this point because nobody knew where to put it back. They used trees. The large hickory tree on so-and-so's farm. Well, the farm's been gone for 200 years and you have no idea if the hickory tree even exists. They would put in stakes and they use sun lines to actually, with a false horizon, to actually map things. You can see on the right an example from the Town of Islip records. This is William Nichols' deed back to the Indians of some land in 1683, or the 1683 deed of the lands that he got from the Indians. He had to get to buy the land first from the tribe, and then at that point he could get his royal patent, which used these. But if you look at the description, you're going to scratch your head and say, half of these, there's a river. Connecticut is got more spellings than you can shake a stick at, and a river called Connecticut, I can't even pronounce it, and south by the Sound. Again, the official name for the Great South Bay is the Sound, or the Great South Sound. It is not a bay, but we corrupted it over the years. But you will find in old deeds and in many things they'll refer to it as the Sound. So people get confused. And I saw an author who wrote a very well-written book who completely screwed up where these people's home was because they used the word Sound. They lived right on the Great South Bay in Islip Hamlet. However, he has them Islip up on Long Island Sound because he did not know that the actual reference to Great South Bay was as a sound back then. Some of the land surveys are such a problem that, you know, if you look at the border of New York State with Canada, there's a section where there's a big bump out and the Canadian side bumps in because the survey party was just a little drunk and kind of lost where they were going. And the United States built a fort in the middle of Canada, and they decided to swap the land so as to not cause more problems. Your deed and the title. It's the basis of your ownership. And you know, we all listen to the ads on television about people stealing everybody's title and so forth. It gives you a little bit more of the backstory. You may find some interesting, sometimes they include some weird stuff on deeds. Now, state of New York, where would you find your deed? The deed comes as a court record. That means it's kept by the court, which is county-based in New York State. So therefore, your deed is in Riverhead at the county clerk's office. All the deeds are there. We do have some of the, somebody copied out some of the early colonial deeds for the town of Islip. So we have some of those in the collection of the historic section of the town records. It's nowhere near complete, but it does give us some examples, and I'll give you some details on that later. Combine the deed and older deeds with the survey and possible older surveys. And again, one place to find these older property boundaries is in something we'll mention in a little while, which are the map books. Comstock put out map books, which frequently tell you who lived there. Again, post offices used them because they had no idea what address there was because there were no addresses. So if you're looking for Mrs. Peak, you would know where her home was by looking at the Comstock maps. Sanborn Company did a whole bunch of maps. For instance, the village of Patchogue has detailed maps because of the mills and all there. They would do it for insurance purposes, and you may find some of these around for other areas. There are pieces of property no one knows is there. We did a look at the farm my grandfather had in Belmore and found out that the two surveys missed the strip of an inch down the middle. We had to file a special quitclaim deed on that inch. Otherwise, somebody might be able to mess up our ownership and demand a lot of money for this 1 inch. That's all over the place because of, again, the survey issues. One thing that a neighbor found out one day, she was asking my wife, you know, how much did it cost for the garbage pickup? Because she was looking for a new pickup company, and my wife said, oh, no, it's in town taxes. And she called Town Hall, and Town Hall said there's no Washington Avenue north of Brook Street in West Sayville. Well, that's true. The town maps did not show Washington Avenue going north of Brook Street, but it did. They had to correct the maps. Again, a survey's mess, and a issue where the builder said, "I can get a road here and put more houses in the back. Why don't I do that?" Happened all the time in earlier times. For instance, if you live on Loop Drive in Sayville, you have a very interesting place to live because Loop Drive is an airport. And you might, now you can go in and you look at the history of the airport and you will find out some more about the property you live on. The Percy Williams estate. A lot of East Islip is the Percy Williams estate. And one of the buildings at Islip Grange is his estate office. Again, you might find out who was there. You may find that it was a rather famous person. And we'll talk about going to newspapers because Sayville, we use an example from here, was an area where many people from the city and noted actors and actresses would spend the summer and then take special trains into the city to do their work on Broadway and then come home. So your home may be a place that somebody boarded who was a famous actor or actress. There is a Long Island tradition that might fool you. I call it the delayed deed, or how to fool the taxman. All the families of the old families pull lists from the 17th century to the early 20th century, mine included. What you would do, and we found this in town records, and it's kind of comical how it was done, you would buy a piece of property. You would immediately write a second deed, usually for $1 or some amount, to your family. That deed would be placed in your pocket because for a long time there was no requirement to register deeds like we do today. You'd hold on to the deed, and when you died, the doctor would frequently say for the death certificate, what time do you want him to die? I saw this with my own grandfather. They delayed it for long enough to go to the bank because they had joint bank accounts. All his accounts were joint with his children. They pulled all the money out of the accounts, and all the deeds were promptly, the duplicate deeds were sent up to the town and registered, which showed that the day after he bought the land, he sold it to his family. Guess what? There was no money owed for the various death duties. Problem for you is you've got to sort this out because you'll find a deed that is dated 30 years before the day it was registered. Again, as I said, we do have examples of that in the colonial deeds, and you will find it in other deeds around here. Another problem, boundaries and names and locations. This is where we get into terms. The boundaries around here are purely coincidental. Don't want to lean back too much, I disappear. This, by the way, is the first railroad station in Bayport. It's still with us. But that building was not always there. The building was in Blue Point, and it was moved here. And we have a lot of that. If you want to go around Sayville, the American Legion Hall is the former West Sayville Firehouse. The gas station from West Sayville is the Sayville, what do you call it, Chamber of Commerce building. So buildings, they move buildings, and sometimes you'll find out that there was another building on your property, they just moved it. And it causes a lot of problems. And one of the problems we have is when we're doing research on a historic structure, we often find out that the structure is not what everybody thought it was. It's another structure somewhere else that was seen. Boundaries and names of locations. The boundaries have changed very frequently. A couple of examples of the overlaps. Where do you live? Well, the towns. You live in the town of Islip. Where you live is not a town. There are some villages which are incorporated and do provide certain services. They can choose what they provide, where a city has to provide everything in New York State. And there are hamlets. Sayville is a hamlet. It has no government. West Sayville is a hamlet. Islip is a hamlet. Bayshore is a hamlet. Hamlets have no government. Their government is the town. That doesn't mean that there's not a pile of governments on top of it, because this is New York State. So you have fire districts. You have the post office, who happily sets up boundaries that they feel like they feel like. You have all sorts of other taxing districts. There is even lighting districts in New York State. Thank goodness we don't have an escalator at the railroad station, because they actually have escalator districts. One of the examples is a lady moved into a home which had a Sayville mailing address. Her son and his girlfriend set the house on fire. The lady called the Sayville Fire Department, who showed up and doused it, but realized that they were actually within the West Sayville Oakdale Fire District, and they called West Sayville. We arrived, and Sayville's picking up, and we're going in and cleaning out the burned out room and everything. And the woman is staring at a police officer and saying, "Why is West Sayville here? What happened to Sayville?" And he goes, "Ma'am, you live in West Sayville's fire district, this West Sayville Fire Department." And she passes out with her last words were, "Oh, the property values." And she got taken off by the ambulance. Bayshore Fire District, this was in the papers only a year ago. People in the northern section of Bayshore Fire District found out they couldn't vote because they never were in the fire district. The fire district the boundaries were made up years ago when the northern portion was part of another area. It became Bayshore. There's a missing hamlet called, let's see, Baywood. There's a missing hamlet called Baywood. It's gone. It disappeared. But those poor people were in the northern section of the Bayshore Fire District, and it was being worked on legally, trying to get this fire district, which they've been providing protection for years, but these people couldn't vote because they weren't in the district. Moving boundaries. We mentioned the moving of the boundary for Brookhaven. There was a fight over the boundary between Islip and the town of Huntington. Huntington took them to court. It wound up being in court for almost 70 plus years. Again, this is New York State, so it takes forever in court. And what happened was, right after that, a number of Islip people moved into the Babylon area, and amazingly, Babylon seceded from the town of Huntington, and Huntington lost its South Shore. So it is confusing, and we've run into this in all sorts of research where somebody wanted to know why an Islip town supervisor was living in Huntington. Well, that's because the boundaries were moved. So his land, suddenly, he didn't move, but the land boundary moved. And again, back to moving buildings like the one in the example. Local government records, County Clerk of Suffolk, land deeds and court records. There are also state Supreme Court records. Many of the things involving property were involved in state Supreme Court cases. You will find them online, bound volumes. You just have to do a lot of digging. You may find something that so-and-so that owned the house was in bankruptcy, and that may give you a complete amount of information. The county clerk's office or the county historical society may actually have the wills and the probated wills, and that sometimes gives you an incredible amount of information about your home. What does the town clerk of Islip have? Vital records, tax records, assessment records, building permits, copies of state historic inventory forms, common school records. Actually, our school systems as we know it are quite recent. Prior to that, it was a town system, and slowly but surely the various school districts broke off. But we do have some common school records, which include taxing material, taxing information, and assessments made against homes and owners. We don't have the Sayville ones that may still be with the school district, or it may be up in the county. We don't know for certain. There are zoning board records. There are road deeds. The town board meeting minutes, we have all of them. And in fact, we're sending, some of them will be sent out shortly to be rebound because the bindings are kind of shot on some of these records. And we do have some old election records back in the the 18th and 19th century. And in case you were worried, we voted for Millard Fillmore. The state archives is a treasure trove. It is not exactly easy to get into because the state of New York does not answer their phones. So you might have to go send them an email. You might have to try to get someone to contact them. You may even have to go there, but they have a tremendous amount of records because many of the records were transferred up to the state. We're not even sure what's up there. We've accidentally run across some stuff. And then the other thing is, if you look to the right, that brown paper is the very first minutes of the town of Islip, or the precinct of Islip at the time, with the election of officials, the first officials, and that occurred in 1720. They had the right to do it in 1710. They just felt there was no reason to do anything. Something else I wanted to talk about, many of the homes in this area are either Sears Homes or copies of Sears Homes. The Sears Roebuck and Company, from the late 19th through to the 1940s, and even somewhat later, you could buy a kit home and you would pay for the home. You might pay for it in installments, and when it was paid off, they would load a boxcar, a flat car, and the family would go down to the railroad yard and your house would arrive, and you could either erect it yourself with the directions they gave you, or you could have a builder do it. Sometimes people even find in the attic of these homes the original instruction books and the plans. Very frequently, those were taken by the builder because around here, there are an awful lot of Sears homes that weren't Sears Homes. They were builders who happily copied everything and built them. And for instance, a builder named Johnson from the area actually built the same house all over Long Island, and everybody thought they were getting an exclusive home. And all he did was keep swapping it side to side, the entrance, and played with the interior. And my parents' home is completely exactly duplicated, no more than 3 blocks from me, by another house. Again, Johnson was the builder. So sometimes you can find the builder, you can find out what he was doing and approximately when he was in business. These are some of the examples. These are online. If you, their catalog, all the catalogs are online, and it shows some of the homes. And I'm sure some of you may recognize the house down the street. As I said, the house all the way to the right-hand side of the screen is actually what my parents' house looks like, except it was flipped. The entrance was on one side, the porch was on the other side, but it is exactly the same house with the same layout. These houses had all the modern conveniences. You could have plumbing or not. You could have electricity or not. You order the kit and it would come, and you could, set your house up in a matter of weeks, actually. Again, this brings up something else. A lot of people go and look for building permits on old houses. There probably are none. That's why old houses have certificates. It used to be called certificates of alternate compliance, but they have certificates rather than a CO. Again, when you alter a home today, you have to bring the whole home up to modern code. So sometimes they do CO the entire home. Most times they do a double, depending on which piece of the building was worked on and how much. Here's some things you might indicate that you have a Sears home. There were serial numbers stamped on the lumber. You can find these in the basement or attic. There were kit homes, and the framing members stamped with a letter and a number to tell you exactly where all pieces went. Again, you go through and you can also tell from the type of lumber. Again, these are real 2x4s. They are not rounded off on the edges, which modern 2x4s are. They are square, and you can't put a nail into them. I guarantee you that modern nails bend when you try to go into this timber. It's been there so long. Some other research hints for these things. Look for shipping labels, and that goes for any house. Look at if you have an old furnace, see if the shipping label is still on there. Very frequently, the maintenance company hangs a tag on it. You can see when they've been maintained, which is something to look for. Baseboard molding, door and window trim, all of these have shipping labels glued in them if it's a Sears home, and sometimes if it's other homes. House design, you look at the book, and the Sears Homes of Illinois website and the mail order homes in Montgomery Ward for Wardway homes give excellent pictures, diagrams, and you can say, okay, this house may or may not be a Sears house, or it may be a builder's copy. That gives you an idea of when the house was probably built. You look in the attic and basement for paperwork. You never know what might be up there. We found stuff everywhere in houses because newspapers were used. A friend of mine had a home, and when he took it down, took down a wall, he found fire damage that had been covered up, in addition to all sorts of newspapers stuffed in the wall that were dated 1914, which they used to insulate and repair the wall. And, it gave them an idea that they had no idea that this addition on the house dated from 1914. Everybody thought it was a lot newer. It wasn't. It was 1914. Mortgage records. Mortgages, again, are something that's a court document. Some may or may not be available. Banks may or may not have registered them, but Sears did, and there are records in there, and you may find a Sears mortgage. Again, mortgages, if you can come across them, have a lot of information. I know my parents, the papers on their house basically gave the history of the previous owners and their divorce and everything else, so it was wonderful. We had all sorts of information. Hardware fixtures. Sears hardware fixtures frequently have an SR, Sears and Roebuck, cast into the bathtub lower corner. There's also things in the sink, but look at your fixtures. Modern fixtures are out of pot metal, cheaper. If you have older fixtures, you will find that they have enamel, unless somebody has gotten something from one of these remainder companies, so forth. You can find a lot of times there's older materials in there. Very frequently, you will find that older homes have 1/2-inch water supply. If it's a new supply, it'll be 3/4 of an inch. These little things you pick up after a while. Wall sheet plaster. My house, everybody said, oh, sheetrock. No, they didn't have any of that. Well, it turns out sheetrock had been in use long before that, the thin sheetrock, into the 1920s. And when we took the sheetrock down, the original sheetrock, on the back was stamped when it was made, because it was made, it was approved for use in New York City. Everything in the house basically was stolen from a job in New York City. And the sheetrock had a stamp from the city fire department on it, fire underwriters basically. And it not only told the date it was made, it also said the time that it was made. So we had an indication that, yeah, here's another proof that the house is a lot older than everybody thought it was. Sears Roebuck's houses all have a unique column arrangement on the front porch, and the eave brackets are a 5-piece type bracket. Not all of them have this. A lot of them are taken down. Building permits in the town of Islip. They started sometime between World War I and World War II, and we may or may not have any. But what we do have is, if the building was altered in some way, we do have the records of alteration, any permit issued. And sometimes there's no permit on the house. Other times, like a recent house in Oakdale, It turns out that we confirmed who the owner was for a bank that was looking on the history of the house because it had to do with deaths and everything else. And we were able to locate that because there was a permit issued to the previous owner, and he was still alive, obviously, at the time. Other resources, historical societies. The library has a history collection. I mentioned before the insurance maps, Sanborn, Comstock. Some of the Sanborn maps actually give you the exact dimensions of a building that they're insuring. So sometimes you can say, oh, wait a minute, this was an extension, this was an extension, or they'll say it was a 1-story and now it's 2 stories. So you may find some of that, and they're held at various places everywhere from the National Archives. Some libraries have them online. There's a few of these areas online. Comstock books, their maps, again, libraries around here, some of them have them. We have a few maps in the collection. We also have some original maps. For instance, on the wall of the town clerk's office is a map that dates from prior to the Civil War. And we know that because of the railroad map on it. And it proved out to be an 1855 map. The atlases, like Comstock and a number of other maps and atlases, are vital. Again, no addresses, but you will find the parcel of property that you're on, who had the overall property. Census records. These are, again, available from Ancestry, and I'm sure the library will tell you how to get into this through the library. There's some information, but not perfect. But we are, for instance, right now working on a book similar to the books that were done for World War I, II, Korea, Vietnam, and they're working on one for after that for veterans, which may give you some information on a veteran that lived in a house. These are available at the Town Record Center and also at the library. But we're doing a Civil War one, and we're finding that there is a tremendous amount of information available that everybody thought was not. So you never know what you may run across in military records and so forth. They may, a pension may give you a pension record to say, yes, he died, but his widow lived there for a number of years afterwards. You were told in school never to use a newspaper, but that might lead to information that you could find nowhere else. For this area, of course, you got Suffolk County News. There are a number of other local papers up in Huntington. You have in Babylon and so forth that covered this area. One paper that people forget about, but especially for Sayville, is very good, which is the Brooklyn Eagle. The Brooklyn Eagle is completely available. Not the modern Brooklyn Eagle, but the original Brooklyn Eagle newspaper is available at the Brooklyn Public Library online. It is excellent for research. The reason is many of the people that were reporters or editors lived in Sayville. So there's a lot of local information and local chit chat. And there is, believe me, there is nothing more chit chatty than the Suffolk County News back then and the Brooklyn Eagle. I don't think anybody had any secrets in these papers. So you may find a world of information about people who live either in your home or in the local area. One of the best newspaper sources, and maybe the library will correct me on this, the one the library has is that a lot of times the research version of it, they change the way you research things. And I'm old fashioned. I like to use ands, ors, nors, all that good stuff. So I use the old Fulton, New York postcards one, and that has the old type of research section. The newer one sometimes gives you some really, really strange research information. But you can go through these newspapers, and of course, the library has the Suffolk County News and other things available to you through them and through their computer system. This is what not so common resources may reveal. One of the treasures we found buried in the back of a room was the 1869 assessment book for the town of Islip. One of the reasons this was important was there was a man somebody was researching something and had gotten everything wrong. And so did the Long Island Forum, another search of information that is available at the library. There's a magazine that's no longer in business called the Long Island Forum. You have to check some of the forum stuff because it's not always right. And we were looking for a Coast Guard hero. And this is the man here, David Ritchie, captain of Cutter, which is a revenue cutter. We know he died in 1873. He's a Civil War hero. Some of you may have studied him in school. He's the man who tore down, saved the flag in New Orleans and became a commissioned officer. But we know he was buried from the town of Islip. It was the largest funeral held in the town of Islip ever. Turns out, what we did find out is that while everybody said it was from the Islip Presbyterian Church, what nobody realized is there were two Islip Presbyterian churches, one of which was actually the present-day Babylon Presbyterian Church, which is where he was buried out of. But it shows that he had property of 30 acres on Clock Place in Bayshore. We used that to chase down the census, and yes, we confirmed he actually did live in Islip. So there's an example of what you might be able to come up with. We also just did some research for the state on the ownership of the Connecticut River State Park Preserve, which was the Southside Sportsman's Club. And it has raised a few questions once we went through this book to see how it was done, where the assessment was moved and suddenly the thing disappears off the assessment rolls. So that's something we're still researching. Some not so common resources at the state archives. We were tasked with looking for the various documents that are the foundation for the town of Islip's government. Well, it turned out that it was a law passed in 1710, but we asked the state for the charter and they informed us, you don't have one, you have the law. But we have this interesting letter, and the letter was written in 1798 by the supervisor at the time, which is an incredible description of the town of Islip in 1798. It gives you what trees were native, what fish, what fowl, what was grown. It's interesting that the seasons haven't changed one bit. We'll hear all about climate change, but everything's the same. But it talks about names for places and those that have been lost. Great letter. This is available from my office in a pamphlet form, both with the letter in full and its transcription, with copious footnotes that help you understand what he's talking about. So this thing is if anybody's interested in the earlier history of their property and this town, this will tell you a great deal, so you can look at what native trees actually were here. Here's an interesting thing that came up. These houses, one of which came up for renovation. I think it's this one. And when it went across the desk, we did some digging and found out these are on the state inventory of historic structures. This is the East Islip School. They busted it into 4 or more buildings. There's actually a few around. And the original look of them, this building over here, is pretty much the original book building. And these are all the classrooms that were around a central core. So you never know what you find out. Some of the people knew this history. Some of the other people living in the houses had no idea that these were schoolhouses. And with this decoration, which the builder removed, here were part of the structure when it was built. So you never know what you're going to run across. Okay, that's just the start. Can I help you? Every search is an adventure. There are no real dead ends, just frustrations. So you adopt the military thing of improvise, adapt, and overcome. We continue to find all sorts of interesting things about Fire Island Lighthouse that have been long lost. If anybody needs to contact me, this is my contact information. My assistant is Chris Albergo. Chris is very good at being able to look stuff up, and those are the phone numbers I can be reached at. The office is in the Town Record Center, 401 Main Street, the Town Hall Annex in Islip, and that is my email, historian@islipny.gov. Now, any questions? I've been talking for a while.
George, I got a question.
Yep.
Hey, I spoke to you back in 2019, which I appreciated. I actually found some artifacts in my backyard when I was digging up an old chicken coop. So you had looked at them and you told me about it must have been like an old boat builder that might have been might have owned the property back in the day. So basically, this kind of spurred my whole interest in learning more about my house. It's a 1926-year-old house. And just from my little research around here, I noticed a lot of the houses around mine were built in 1950. So I'm thinking to myself, my house must be pretty unique for it to be so old. And now it's just spurred my curiosity to learn more about it. And then one thing you mentioned was Johnson, because I'm on Johnson Street. And you had, I think you said that the name was changed to Johnson because he died from Pearl Harbor. Is that what it was? I heard you say.
Johnson Avenue is, and there's a monument at the foot of Johnson Avenue where that waterfall is that seems to decorate the apartment buildings of Fairfield. That is dedicated to one of the Johnsons who died at Pearl Harbor. Johnson family is an old Sayville family. They're still here, actually, some of them, but it's an old family. Like many of the families around here, they have happily dispersed. Mine has been one of those. It's dispersed all over the country, but there are some still here. But Johnson Avenue was named for him because he died at Pearl Harbor.
Okay. And I talking about like the borders and stuff, even my property line, I actually, the way the garage was built, it's actually 10 feet by 10 feet on my neighbor's property. So I was like, it was very unique for me to come across that, because I'm like, well, what do we do? So the neighbors were like, we had to sign off on a contract saying, yeah, it's fine. You know, we don't have a problem with it. But now I'm curious to look back more on how did the property line become what it was. So my guess was, from my understanding, from what I learned, my house was owned by a couple, but they also owned the house on the corner and the house to the left of it. And from my understanding is, I think it might have been farmland. I don't know how long ago. And then they built the houses, I assume. And then after the fact, they decided, okay, let's have a survey. And then they put up the fences and they realized that the people's property, like, you know, the garage was on this one's property. And so it's all wacky. So like I said, that's why I had to join this meeting, because I'm really curious now to learn more about how my property line became what it is, and how, you know, who was living here in 1926, who built the house. Is there possibility I will find out more information about this house? Because like I said, it's 1926, so it's been around for a long time, and I'm just real curious now.
Again, we haven't, one of the problems is that nobody has gone through the Town of Islip's records and codified them, you know, assessed them, as it said. And that's been one of the problems. We are now doing that. Chris has been at this now part-time and now full-time for the last 4 years. Hopefully at the end of this year sometime at the town and the clerk's website, there'll be a thing so you can start researching what we hold, rather than come in and say, okay, what do you got? You know, which right at the moment things we're back into semi-lockdown. So
sure, yeah.
But the point is that for years we didn't even know what we had. We just had piles. The piles are now getting organized, and so we're also learning how to use what's been sitting in there for absolutely forever. And we also, you know, not only get things from the public, but of course we also do research for the various town agencies who had no idea what was in the records and are looking what's been saved and so forth. And it, you know, we actually have a few major issues going on because of some of the similar things you brought up. And my own home was the same way. I had half my neighbor's backyard.
Yeah.
The easiest way, one attorney was trying to hold him up for $5,000, and I said, just give me $1, and I handed it back to them. I said, you had to hand me the $1. I don't want it, but here's the deed. You know, I'm not going to move the fence. But a lot of that stuff is this, like, for instance, the 2 houses on this side of the block, my house and the house next to me to the east, were owned by brothers, and they hated each other. So they
Yeah.
wound up putting fences up, and nobody, and my father's old thing, he goes, we don't need no stinking permits. So he built the entire side of the house, which there's no permits for.
Yeah. Yeah.
But since there's absolutely no diagrams for the house and no building permits for the house, nobody knew it was never there.
Yeah.
So, and that's, we can find a lot of these. And when they split the property up, the kids probably split it up and said, okay, we'll do this. Nobody went out there. Half the time they didn't do surveys.
Yeah.
Until modern times, and somebody goes, hey, your garage is 10 feet over your neighbor's property.
Yeah. So
And
you're
you're
basically
the only one.
so basically start the research on our own first in the with the way things are going right now. Try to find as much as possible, and then if anything, contact you or Chris and just say, by any curiosity, do you have any more information on my house? And
Well, and we can, again, with the things we can help you. I mean, there's a limit to how much we can do.
yeah,
And you can make appointments to come in and look at what's thing. Once you have enough information, because you can, we just had a couple filmmakers come in and they went nuts. Not only did they not know what they were looking at,
Yeah.
You know, they were looking for certain things, and I knew right away what they were looking for. And I said, it's in here. And he says, where is it? I said, look at the names. Don't look for information on the incident. Look for the names. And sure enough, the names were there. They just didn't bother to write anything else down because they didn't want anybody to know about it.
yeah,
So, you know, it's kind of like having some knowledge. And again, I don't know whether the county's open or not. I do know that the Suffolk County Historical Society is open, and they allow you to research, and they have a very knowledgeable man there. And sometimes you will wind up getting information on families, entire genealogies and all. They have all sorts of things at the Suffolk County Historical Society. They even have some deeds and some, excuse me, and some probates.
okay.
So that could help you.
And just another curious question, because my house eventually is going to be 100 years old. Is there any actual like historical home tax, and is it like for homes that are 100 years old? I thought I read something to that effect on the Islip Town site somewhere.
There is some, but it's not quite what you think it is.
Okay.
You know, and I would rather say that you take a good look at what's there, and then we can discuss it, because it's kind of complicated. And just having a 100-year-old home is not necessary. Mine is almost 100, 1928, and
Wow, okay.
there's almost nothing left of the original house except
Yeah. Okay.
certain floors.
Okay.
Had to replace the walls and a bunch of other, but the outside is solid concrete. They built this house out of concrete.
Wow.
I live in a bomb shelter. Again, it was built by stealing stuff from city buildings.
Wow. Very.
Hence why it's built the way it is.
So then, I mean, because I was just thinking, like, if there was an actual tax break for a historical home, and
There is and there isn't.
okay,
And that's something you have to look at very carefully, because it depends on if it's truly historical. Like, for instance, St. John's Church would be historical in Oakdale, but St. John's Church in Sayville would not be.
okay.
So, you know, I see I got a hand. I think that's a hand up, right?
Yes.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
Hey, George,
Yes.
it probably pops up as Jack Williamson, but you had shared with me some time ago about the fact that we live on Candy, and that Candy Avenue had a train or a horse trestle that went down the middle of the roadway at one point. So that and we know that there were a bunch of hotels that were down here. Is there is the Sayville Library the best place to find maps and photographs of not just our house, but the community down here?
Well, Stephanie, I know the Historical Society has a lot. I know that there are some things there, and we also have a large postcard collection at the Town of Islip, which shows many of the hotels.
Yeah.
And we do have information on the horse car line.
So I can tell you what we have here. We don't have a lot of, we have a couple of maps. I had put them in the chat that are from about the same time period, around 1915. We don't have a lot of pictures. What we have regarding postcards is available online now. I'll put our digital collection in the chat. So that is searchable by keyword to some degree. If it had information on the postcard, as in a title or some kind of physical printing not handwritten on the card, I included that in the data for the image. So like if you're searching for something on Candy Avenue, you might be able to find Candy Avenue because it was printed on the front of the card, Candy Avenue looking south or something like that. So we don't have a lot of pictures aside from that that are searchable. We have a few old scrapbooks that were specific to one or two families that whose ancestors have given us them a long time ago. They will eventually be digitized, but they currently aren't. So I know a lot of people come in asking, they think, well, you know, we would have a lot of that kind of thing, and unfortunately we don't. So I'll put the address to the local history page, and then you can see from there our digital collections.
And Stephanie, while you're doing that, you're with the library, right?
Yes, I'm a local history librarian.
Okay, and so we came by the library when we came in for the summer, and we're introduced to the Sayville Historical Room, I guess, and then there's an interior room that's like the super secret. Have to have the the decoder ring to get into.
Right.
Are there maps in there that would include like this entire area, including where the old golf course used to be, for example? And
So what we have in there, we have the Long Island collection, it's called, which has an outer room. It's currently being used as an office, but like
Yeah.
it can be accessed. That has our circulating materials about Long Island in general, as well as a reference collection for the Long Island Television and Radio Historical Society. So you have two different bays of books, and one section of it is the Long Island specific books. Then behind the wall in there, there's our special storage room. We affectionately call it the vault. We can access that for you and bring the materials out to look through. So the couple of maps that we have the one Sanborn map and one Atlas of Suffolk County. We have working copies of those that we had made so people can handle them. And so we can bring you those out to look through and browse, and you can make copies of those. We only have the two. And then we have some old, I've been trying to save just any old atlases and things we have. So maybe we have a map from like the 60s, it's nothing super historic, and nothing that's before the 1900s. But anything we have in the local history room should, aside from the scrapbooks and anything like any ephemera we've gotten more recently, is available in the county catalog. So if you searched for like the Sanborn map, for example, if you search insurance map for Sayville, it will come up in the catalog, and you'll see that it's available in the local history room. You would just have to ask one of the librarians to be able to see it.
Great, thank you.
The postcard, our postcard collection and so forth, if you just give us a call and make an appointment, you can come on in, and take a look at what we can get out for you. We have almost every postcard from all the hotels. Another source of information on Sayville hotels is the West Sayville Fire Department history. Many of them made really nice fires. And in fact, the West Sayville Fire Department has a large collection of photos and all, but the 100-year anniversary book, which I know the library has a copy of, if not, I have one, has some really good stories on the burning of the buildings, which seemed to be quite a show around the 60s and 70s.
But
But you know, there's a lot of stuff out there, and we do have quite a bit also in the town on some of that, and we do have small Xerox copies of them from some of the maps because they were required when the building was placed in the state inventory. So
Right.
the historic structure in the area that was on the list, they also included maps of what the area looked like that the researcher found. And those researchers were usually from the Historical Society. The town paid the historical societies from the state funding to do this inventory. So we
Right.
do that. And again, working with all resources. And then the Sayville Historical Society, the book that they did on Sayville, that light green book, has a lot of pictures in that would be of interest to you.
so if I could just ask one more question, then I'll turn it over to anybody else. Is there a chat, what do you call it? Like a chat page forum where other people within Sayville have been doing their own research and are sharing information that they found?
There's a few Facebook groups. There's a, you're from Sayville when
Oh,
they talk a lot about historic stuff. It's not like,
hilarious.
um, like current or the last 30 years or something. They go way back when some of the chats
Right.
post a lot of photos. There's a Sayville history and happenings group
On Facebook?
on Facebook.
Mhm.
I think there's one more. There was another Sayville history or Sayville happenings group.
Okay.
They have similar names, but
I'll look it up. But that's a great start. Thank you.
And again, we're here to help. If you need it, we'd be happy to work with you here in the town historian's office as well as the library. We work together. We've done a few programs together, and people get stuck, let us know.
I just want to see, did we answer the question by Thomas about do we know when the town line shifted between Islip and Brookhaven?
Yes, we do. It was, well, we know the approximate time because it's in the Brookhaven town minutes, which I have online here, but I don't have them in front of me. And there were a couple different times, but the first time was when they took the vote, and that would have been sometime around 17-1 or 2 in that area, because Nickel did not live in the town of Islip. We don't even know if he ever actually lived here. He built a house in 1701 in East Islip because he got kicked out of the state legislature because he was not a resident of Suffolk County, yet he was running as a Suffolk County representative. So he got kicked out. He proceeded to build a house. He actually lived in what is now Nassau County, then Queens, which is Plandome. The village of Plandome is his estate, his father's estate and his estate. And he's buried in a parking lot in Plandome somewhere, kind of like Richard I think it's Richard II. So we'll look for him someday, but he and his father are buried in the parking lot. But then the actual final boundary, which involved the water, was settled by the state of New York in 1788, and then again in 1789-90, because what they did was they gave the whole bay to Islip. Brookhaven blew up and said, we'll agree to the line boundary, but we want our bay back. And then there was an agreement that Islip people could use Brookhaven's bay, but it was Brookhaven's bay. So that was the state. So those are what I would say were the official final boundaries were done then.
My question was really about North Lincoln Avenue. My ancestors lived there in the early 30s, and they had a stable address that was 124, 126 North Lincoln Avenue. And today it's 626 and 624 Lincoln Avenue, and it's not Sayville anymore. Was it considered Sayville in the early 30s, or was it?
Again, this is the post office, and here we go. The post office boundaries have no connection to reality whatsoever. They're set by the post office. So what happened was Sayville Post Office covered a lot larger area. And before then, in the 1860s, everything was Islip. All mail was in Islip, and you had to go to Islip to pick your mail up.
But their kids had to go to school in Sayville schools.
Right.
And if they were part of Town of Brookhaven, wouldn't they have had to gone to Patchogue?
They were not part of Brookhaven because Brookhaven gave that land up in the 18th century. That is Sayville. That was Sayville. They went to, and then remember, there are people in Oakdale that graduated from Sayville schools. Again, all of the schools that you know did not exist. For instance, West Islip didn't even have a high school till the 1950s. It was a common school, which meant they only went up to the 8th grade. Oakdale had its own school, but all of its high school, they had to send to Sayville because Sayville had a high school because they were a union-free school district. Oakdale eventually fully merged, only was partially merged, and it's another long story, with Connecticut. And the same thing with parts of Lakeland. So it's very confusing. The boundaries change. I could sit down for hours and go through with the boundary. Post offices were whatever postal area and was running things, and then they would turn it over to, as the post office added offices, they would turn that over to that post office and redo the boundaries. So, you know, again, there are people, there's a section of the West Sayville Oakdale Fire District where the people have Sayville mailing addresses. They're in the West Sayville Oakdale Fire District. Their only road access is through West Sayville. And oh, by the way, they go to Connecticut schools. I mean, that's throughout the town of Islip, throughout all, because back when this was done, it was all farmland and it didn't matter. And 1930s, this place was still the land of God forgotten. Nobody can get here. I can remember when I was a child, our neighbor in back of us moved to Foster Avenue in Sayville. And my father said, why would anybody in their right mind move there? You can't get anywhere from there, which was true at the time. The roads you see, all of that didn't exist. They were not there. So again, we're trying to look at this with a 21st century mind. And even as late as the mid 20th century, this place was the middle of nowhere. I see other hands up.
We have a chat question. Any suggestions for how to start to research a house that was moved? I could say I just included in the chat a link to one of the collections we have now online. It was our old local history website before we got a new website for the library. I archived the old local history pages, and that was all done by Webb Morrison, who used to was from the area. And that mentions streets, houses, businesses. It's searchable by keyword. A lot of times if houses were moved, he mentioned it. He mentions them in there. If there were hotels or businesses that buildings that got moved and then made into houses, it can be mentioned there, particularly the hotels. There's a few houses that were hotels were split apart and made into houses and then moved down the streets. So that's a good place to start.
Yeah, the Jones estate is a perfect example where they split the house in half and they're next to each other. And then they moved the water mill. that supplied the water for the estate went up to Bohemia and now is back at the Grange, in Islip Grange. So yeah, one of the issues in Islip is that buildings, they could move buildings where we have an act of Congress to move a building. However, depends on when it was moved. If you can get an approximate time of when it was moved in a lot, block, and section where it was moved to, they had to have a permit. Those permits are in the town records because there would have been a building permit or a moving permit issued. And we actually were involved in solving an old murder that the family wanted to solve. And it turned out the building was moved and we were able to locate where the building originally was, which explained a lot of things that made no sense to it. So sometimes we have that again. If it's under the lot, block, and section and in the building department records, we may be able to find it. Can't guarantee anything because a lot of times they just move stuff.
That's great. Thanks so much.
Hi, George, I have a question for you.
Yes.
I'm looking for more information. You said something about deeds for the roads?
Yeah. Yeah.
Would that include right of ways?
We have a bunch of road deeds that deeded property roads to the town.
Yeah, that's what I'd be interested in. I have something
Those
on
have not been
Swayze
gone
Street.
through because they were part of a fire and they are very delicate and we have not had a chance. We have them. Specific, I can't tell you what's in it because Chris has not gone through that box yet. But sometimes we can find information on other pieces because you will find, you know, in some deeds, there's some oddball things that are in the deed.
Right,
I know of places where the town has been maintaining roads they don't own. They didn't know that because
Right.
they made the assumption that it was turned over to the town. And every once in a while, we'll run into something. We just had one in Brightwaters where the town's been plowing and maintaining a road. It turns out that we didn't really own all of it. And we
Right.
don't know who owns it because it depends that the survey was done, you know, back in the early 1900s. And obviously on
Right.
this of 50 feet was easy.
right. That's what this is. It's off of Swayze Street. And I'm trying to find out exactly who owns it. We have the deed to use the right of way. And it just keeps getting transferred, like you said,
Mhm.
from deed to deed to deed. And it doesn't actually say who owns it or what it
Well-
was for.
Well, the right of way was to the lots that they put in there. The original right of way would probably be in the original sale deeds and the original deed to the property that was broken up. I know what
Right.
you're talking about, but
And that, yeah, and that was back in, when was it? It was 1897
yeah, that may be at the county. You'd have to
at the
dig through
county.
That's a county record. It's a deed.
So there should be a deed from 1897 with that right of way on it.
Well, as you go back and research your property, you will see HD going back for everybody who purchased that property. And
Yeah, we only got
eventually-
to the 30s then and lost it.
All right, well, that's because of the way they broke stuff up. But what you will do is, if you looked at the bottom, it should give you a LIBOR and page.
Right.
And that LIBOR or page is where the next document or the document, as you go back in the line, is located.
Okay. So the title company just gave up.
Well, again, you're a victim of the torrent system,
Okay.
which didn't go back very far.
Okay.
That's the torrent system. You can go into the county, and I've done this because I made some money as a teenager doing this, going in and going back to the records. But at the bottom of the deeds all have a LIBOR and a page. LIBOR meaning the book, and then the page in the book it's in.
Mhm.
Then the document will also say deed from LIBOR page such and such. You know, it is the predecessor, or this is the property was part of LIBOR such and such page so and so.
Okay.
It's
So we
usually-
should be able to follow that trail all the way back.
well, to some extent. Again, when we get back too far, you're running into the Edwards and the Nichols, which happily traded property because one of the issues with the early families were, as my grandfather said, the greatest crop he ever raised was daughters because you could marry them off to all the influential old families, which is what they did. So all these families were intermarried. So at Thanksgiving, I actually saw this at a Thanksgiving dinner where one of my uncles, distant uncles, my father wanted to buy the lot next door, and he says, "Yeah, I got the deed right here. I'm carrying it. You got 2,500, George?" "Yeah, I got it back to the house." He went and got $2,500 handed at the Thanksgiving dinner in between slicing the turkey and slicing the ham. But it was done all the time, and that's, you know, in the families, it makes it somewhat difficult to figure out who has what.
Right, right,
And so that, again, that's what makes this an adventure and some fun.
right, right. Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir. Anything else?
No more questions. All right, so I will actually send out an email. George is going to give me his the document that they have with information on it. I'm going to include our local history. I have a little brochure that kind of summarizes some of the like the basics of what we have in the local history collection here, but you can also just check out our webpage, the local history department portion of our new website. Gives you all that stuff. And I will send you a link.
One thing I want to add, if somebody has put together a story of their research and what they found, please send it on to us. We actually put something out, in which Stephanie has seen, which is the vignettes of Islip Town history. And we'd love to include something like that to help people say, hey, you know, the so-and-so found this, and here's what they ran into, and here's where they found things. And you know, you never know what you'll run across, because there are some great stories. I'll give you an example. There's one that we've been looking. There was a riot during World War I in downtown Sayville. Somehow or other, the Suffolk County News seemed not to report it. So not reporting news is nothing new. But we found references to it other places. So eventually we're going to find out why there was a riot from the soldiers in front of the candy store. Don't ask me, but it sounds like a great story. Thank you all. And hopefully I've been of some assistance. Feel free to email us, to contact us. We'll do the best we can to help you along, or possibly say, yeah, we happen to have something on that. So again, been a good evening.
Thank you, George, and thanks everybody for joining us tonight. Have a good one.
Night.